Bram Stoker may not have been the original creator of the vampire, but that did not stop him from creating the ever-so-famous character of Dracula. Though it would take years of inspiration for Stoker to design the most famous vampire, Stoker spent 7 years researching European folklore and the stories of vampires. He was heavily influenced by Emily Gerard's Transylvania superstitions. After reading the essay, Stoker has stated that he saw a vampire in a nightmarish dream after eating too much dressed crab. He then realized that he needed to create the perfect vampire. Stoker used earlier fictional vampires and his own imagination to make him bigger and more evil than his predecessors. The title would be The Undead, and the character would be Count Vampire. After reading one of William Wilkinson's books that mentions Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century Transylvanian-born prince, also known as Vlad Dracula of Wallachia, Stoker became interested in the name Dracula, which in Wallachian language means devil. Stoker then decided to change the vampire to Count Dracula, and the title to simply Dracula. Without all of Bram Stoker's inspiration, it is very hard to imagine that someone else would have created Dracula.
There have been many versions of Dracula over the years since Bram Stoker's publishment of Dracula. Dracula has evolved slowly to keep pace with the changing generations. The early portrayals of Dracula all focused around the same thing. Dracula was the symbol of evil, and you could only be safe by protection of holiness. The one version of Dracula that I found in the timeline that had been varied the most was Christopher Lee's 1958 depiction of Dracula. This was during the Cold War, and Dracula was used by the U.S. to represent their enemies. They saw him as pure evil and unforgivable, so that's how they made Dracula. He was pure evil and had motives that became unimportant. He shows that Dracula changes with time and is used for current representation. Dracula is still being made into films today and will most likely be changed into new formations in the future.
Richard Chase. He was an American serial killer who killed 6 people in the span of months in California. He drank the blood of his victims and ate their internal organs. He did this as a part of a delusion that he needed to prevent Nazis from turning his blood into powder via poison that they had planted beneath his soap dish in his bathroom. Mauricio Lopez. His niece was having an affair with his brother, so he had threatened them both, and when that didn't work, he stabbed his brother in the heart and liver in front of his niece and all 4 of their kids, then filled a plastic cup with his blood and drank it before fleeing the scene. James Riva shot his handicapped grandmother as she sat in her wheelchair. The gun was loaded with golden bullets. He drank the warm blood gushing from the wounds before trying to cover his tracks by burning her body and her home. He claimed to be a 700-year-old vampire. He told his mother that he would gain strength from drinking his grandmother's blood.
The most famous vampire is, of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula, though those looking for a historical, real Dracula often cite the Romanian prince Vlad Tepes, after whom Stoker is said to have modeled some aspects of his Dracula character. The characterization of Tepes as a vampire, however, is a distinctly Western one. In Romania, he is viewed not as a blood-drinking sadist, but as a national hero who defended his empire from the Ottoman Turks. The vampires most people are familiar with are revenants or dead corpses that are said to return from the grave to harm the living. These vampires have Slavic origins, only a few hundred years old, but others, older versions, are thought to be supernatural or demons. While most people can name several characteristics of vampire lore, there are no firmly established characteristics. Some vampires are said to be able to turn into bats and wolves, others cannot. Some are said to not cast a reflection, but some do. There is one universal characteristic, and that is the draining of a vital bodily fluid, usually blood.
Stoker was a sickly child, mostly bedridden during his early years. During this time, his mother entertained him with stories and legends from Silgo, which included supernatural tales and accounts of death and disease. In 1878, Stoker married actress Florence Balcombe. They settled in London and together had a son named Irving Noel Thornley. During this time, he became friends with Irishmen Oscar Wilde and William Butler Yeats, as well as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of the famous Sherlock Holmes. There remains some controversy about what killed Bram Stoker on 20th of April 1912. Stoker's nephew, Daniel Farsom, published a biography in 1975 in which suggested that the death certificate stating one of the causes of death as locomotor axis 6 months, a way of avoiding public notice of citing the sexually transmitted disease. Stoker had previously suffered a series of strokes. Stoker's cremated remains are located at Golders Green Crematorium in London.
Andrea Chikatilo, also known as the Rostov Ripper and the Shelter Belt Killer. He claimed his first victim, a 9-year-old girl, on December 22nd and would go on to kill 52 more. He evaded capture for almost 15 years. Mutilation of the eyes and complete or partial removal of the sexual organs became 2 signature moves. He targeted adolescent boys and girls, often raping and cannibalizing them, as well as drinking their blood. Marcelo de Andrade was the son of poor northeastern immigrants and grew up in Rio de Janeiro. As a child, he was a victim of sexual and physical abuse and lived without running water. Around April, he began a killing spree that would last 9 months and claim 14 victims, who were all poor young boys. He raped all his victims and confessed to drinking their blood, claiming to have done so in order to become as beautiful as them. His warped, sick mindset can be best seen in his own declarations. I preferred young boys because they are better looking and have soft skin, and the priest said that children automatically go to heaven if they die before they're 13. So I know I did them a favor by sending them to heaven. It is interesting to note that he belonged to Christian and worshipped his own mother like a saint. Fritz Hermann, also known as the Vampire of Hanover or the Butcher of Hanover. This German serial killer is believed to be responsible for at least 27 murders and was convicted of 24. Although his criminal career began in 1898 for molesting children and later came to include assault, petty theft, and burglary. His first known murder did not take place until September of 1918. From September of 1898 to June of 1924, he would go on to rape, murder, and butcher at least 27 youths, spanning from ages 10 to 22. He killed many of his victims by biting through their throats. He sold personal belongings acquired from his victims and reportedly sold their flesh on the black market, although this may just be a rumor. Hermann is considered one of Germany's most prolific killers, both for the number of victims and the extremely grisly nature of his crimes. He was charged with 27 murders, convicted of 24, and guillotined on April 15, 1925. His last words were, I repent, but I do not fear death." His head was preserved in a jar by scientists so they could study his brain and is now at the Gotten Medical School.